No, no buzz. A Just Bees book club. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett is the book that I have read that I'm talking about right now. Beautiful little cover, right? Little dabble glass, little cantons. Um, I guess this is also dabble glass in its own way. Um, for the first time in a long time, this is a book I finished today, which doesn't mean I have that much more thoughts about it. I'm going to read the notes I took. These are the entirety of the notes I've taken. Empire of Canum, My Fruits, Kirpus Mushrooms, Leviathans, Ring Cities, Iodex, Alterations, Contagions. It's a list of just the proper nouns, basically, that I could think of after having finished the book, when doing that in about 30 seconds. The Tainted Cup is, I guess, the beginning of a trilogy. It just came out this year, so it came out in, I think, February. But it is a murder mystery. Uh, the marketing material around it is very much interested in positioning it as a Sherlock Holmes, as a Holmes and Watson style mystery, which is like not wrong. Um, that is also set in a secondary world, thus the list of proper nouns, like Kirpus mushroom, which is actually really cool. The Kirpus mushroom is one of my favorite little bits there. The Leviathans thing is really interesting, and I think, I suspect, gives away a lot more of the book than I think it is meant to. It is a secondary fantasy murder mystery that is, it feels very predictable to me in many ways. Or not predictable. I'm not a person who reads for prediction. I'm not a person who tries to understand the future of the thing that I am reading, because I'm not reading for plot. I'm not reading for story most of the time. I'm reading for words and for structure. And the structure of this thing is pretty fucking solid, I think. It it works as a murder mystery pretty well, despite having some of the more annoying aspects of murder mystery writing, or of like cozier murder mystery writing, or of not like cozy mystery, but like of I've read my fair share of Nancy Drew fairly recently. The structure of cliffhangers, or the way of sort of stringing the reader along, I think is not my favorite thing in the world. I think it sort of insults your intelligence a little bit, as a reader, but also, young adult sells a shit ton of copies, and I feel the same way about that. See, what is it? A war, a myth, a genre? My essay that also turned into a shitty video essay here. Um, essay, video essay means a different thing. I read it here rather than extemporizing as I usually do. As you know, B, because this is a Just Bees book club. Only bees are here. Only bees are here. Only bees are allowed to watch whatever fucking thing I say every time. Every time. Almost 150 of these videos, huh? I lost my point because I started talking about other things, which is a thing that never happens in this book. The Tainted Cup never sort of sidetracks itself. It's extremely concisely is not the right word, because it's like almost 400 pages. Is that right? No, it's 410 pages with including the acknowledgments. Over 400 pages. It is really tightly plotted in the first, basically in the first part, in part one, which is like 30 pages or so, and it is a complete mystery in and of itself that does a good job of like opening itself out to the rest of the possible book. And I think it's really structurally useful because it what it does is basically introduce both the world and the sort of pertinent characters and a handful of ancillary characters, because you need those as somebody who's writing a murder mystery, because you need red herrings, you need some possibility that it's not the first person you thought might have done it. Um, uh, but the reveal works pretty well. The like the parlor scene works pretty well to say, not that like this is a particularly well written one, but that Jackson Bennett is entirely capable of delivering not just the setup to a mystery, but the big reveal. And I think the whole book ends up working along the same lines. Again, it becomes deeply not concise in many ways, but also there are very few, if any, like superfluous scenes. Everything sort of has a very clear button on it, as in it snaps together, and then it snaps together, and then finally everything is buttoned up, and the only loose threads ostensibly are the ones that are going to lead to the next mystery, because it's already sort of announced as a trilogy, or is not. Is it announced as a trilogy? It says it on literally the title page. It says Shadow of the Leviathan Book 1, so I guess theoretically it could be a whole series. I don't really see this sustaining. I could see how a whole trilogy is mapped out from this first book. I think if you push past a book 3, there has to be some loosening of that of those buttons. Because if you have, I think the only way this pushes past a book 3, because it's a mystery. Mysteries tend to go either 3 books or 100, right? Um, I don't see the possibility of maintaining this level of world, because I mean, again, also, you know this is, when I say secondary world fantasy, I mean secondary world fantasy, right? There's a fucking map here. All those like big those dark lines that you can see on the screen, they're like fading out and then coming back in. Those are giant walls that are protecting from the incursion of the Leviathans. Attack on Titan didn't last that long, right? And then like all of the worlds in between. This is whiting out because I'm not doing this professionally in any way, but like when I say secondary world fantasy, it is a book that opens with a map. It is a fucking secondary world fantasy. It's not. This is not. At least on any indication based in this book, this is not far future Earth. Even though the Shannara books are secondary world fantasy, and they're also far future Earth. That's not like it. But like it's not a portal fantasy where no one crawls into a fucking wardrobe, right? It's not. It's not alternate history fantasy. This is not set in the past of the world as we know it in any conceivable way, other than if it is tied back into that later. And I say Shannara very specifically because Shannara is very clearly in the first book on Far Future Earth. I think it's sort of forgotten about because no one really cares, and I probably shouldn't. But I rewatched, or when the Shannara Chronicles came out on MTV, I was like, this is a really fun time. In a way that like I hadn't really ever seen high fantasy been done on TV, because everyone was doing fucking Game of Thrones, and I watched like 15 seconds of that show the same way I read like 3 sentences of the first one of those novels. I was like, this is garbage. This is just deeply uninteresting. It's poorly written. It just looks like shit. That's for the books and the show separately. When the Chronicles of Shannara came up, I kind of vibed with that first season, and I was like, "There's no way in hell it's getting a second season," and that was very obviously true. Go check my fucking review on Strange Horizons about that. Anyway, this is a secondary world murder mystery that is book one, and I'm hoping it's a trilogy, I guess. Robert Jackson Bennett, not a writer I'm super familiar with, but I think has written a couple of trilogies before this also. Things I really liked about it: the world building and the mystery building. Like the first 30 again pages or so, the first part of it. It's called The Man in the Tree, and it goes very hard. It does a really good job of immediately setting up a world, and of like, again, that secondary world, that non-Earth world, and also of giving you just a bottle room sort of mystery. Let's see. Okay. I'm trying to find out how many pages it is. Okay, so it's 70 pages. You're saying somebody weaponized a contagion? It seems very likely. And then at the end of page 70, we start part 2, The Breach, and then we go, the next 340 pages or whatever, which are good. Like I said, there's basically not a wasted scene over the course of this whole book. Anytime something is on screen, anytime something is being described, any action that is being described is meaningful to either the world or the plot or both in some way. Which is to say, it's very economical. There's not a lot that seems to be happening beyond what's important to the world or to the plot. There's a couple of there's some capital R representation that happens that I think was extremely obvious 100 pages before it gets sort of talked about in any way. That's being generous. And that's in sort of multiple valences that I'm just yeah, that's cool. And I mean that both genuinely and dismissively. That's cool, meaning that's cool, and also cool. Nothing super special to me in any way, but I sort of just don't like this tone. And I guess maybe that's sort of the last thing to say, or maybe before that. I think it does wrap up in an interesting way. I think it opens itself up to a sequel in a way that I was yeah, that seems about right. I didn't predict every twist and turn, but also don't predict things. And I think if you had a more mystery reader's mind, you could probably nail most of it down, and that matters to you in as much as it matters to you, which is to me not very much at all. But people who aren't bees, who we sometimes have to think of here, sometimes we have to think of non-bees when sometimes we think about non-bees. We don't have to, but we do. But there was one particular line from fairly late in the book that I wanted to read to sort of give a sense of the prose of this book. And I'm thinking of it both in... or rather, I'm not thinking of it. It struck me as a moment... I didn't actually take a note of this. I just started before starting to write this video. Also, how long... How many times have I worn this outfit in a row? What what's going on? Um, it didn't strike me. It didn't strike me. I just was I just was flipping through the book, and I sort of remembered where it was on the page, and I decided that this would be a good indication the of the prose of this book, both in terms of its economy in the positive sense in prose writing, the way that um, it speaks directly and impactfully, but also of maybe the lack of sort of broader imagination. Um, My skin began to crawl, unable to comprehend what I beheld. It it was like looking up on an overcast day and seeing a gap in the clouds, and then watching, dumbfounded, as an eye peered through the hole, staring down at you. It's a very it's a very coherent image, and that had a semicolon in it, so it's not a young adult sentence. Um, it is also one that I think is meant to be much more skin crawling than it actually is. It feels like a reach toward something weird, but also like a thing I would have imagined as a child. And that's like most of the prose in this to me. Not that specific sort of reaction to an image, but like the sense that it is trying to provoke a particular sensation that uh, never quite strays far enough from what is accessible fairly easily to the imagination. Um, for instance, right? Like, um, I don't know. I put the book away. I unmarked the page, but it would be like something along the lines of it was like staring into a gap in the clouds only to see an eye closing. Right, that is a different image than to see an eye opening, because when you see an eye opening, it opens from the bottom, so you can imagine the gap then turns into an eye, as opposed to a gap in the clouds where the eye closes, where you realize there's a sudden absence where something was already staring at you, right? Like very, very simple change in description um, that is a fundamentally different affect. Um, in the same way that like you could describe and sticking with the eye imagery, right? If you're talking in a more sort of gothic horror, right? You could say, um, as I approached the castle, um, it was dark entirely, but for one window up in the gables, which are at a as the gate opened, a gust blew, and the lit window went out like an eye blinking. And you could change that. You could do the same description. Someone in a carriage gets to a gate, opens it. The second the lit window turns out, and say instead of blinking, you say opening. That's a fucking different feeling. And I think for all that the Tainted Cup does quite well, um, in terms of plotting out a murder mystery, establishing a secondary fantasy world being a very readable book. Kind of devoured it, right? Like it's 400 pages. I read it in like 4 days, 3 days, and like not like exclusively or particularly intently, just like sort of in fits and snatches, except for a couple of moments where I was just like, I'm kind of sucked in. I have time. I want to just go for it. Um, it it never quite had that moment where it turned itself on me, or it forced me to go, oh, on the level of writing. um or on this, not on the level of writing, because all the things I'm describing are on the level of writing. That was a stupid mistake of me to make. But on the level of like a particular sentence, which means to me that it's a quite good book that I'll probably not think about very much, which is fine. I don't have to think about everything forever, right? Right? I don't have to keep thinking about everything forever, right? Forever? Thanks for not watching.